Hi, this is Justin Coletti of Sonic Scoop, and welcome to MixCon 2022. We've got a whole bunch of great presentations coming your way this year from a whole bunch of major mixers, producers, engineers taking us under the hood of real mixes. And today we've got an awesome presentation for you that is all about mixing music, mixing soundtracks, and not only in stereo, but also adapting stereo mixes to surround sound and Dolby Atmos. Whether you're working in surround or Atmos now, or whether you hope to in the future, or you're just curious about, this is going to be an awesome presentation for you. Or if you're just working in stereo, there's going to be a ton of great key takeaways and insights into adapting stereo mixes to surround sound formats like 5.1, 7.1, and all the way up to Dolby Atmos. Our presenter today is a great producer engineer named Todd Burke. He was working in the 90s with major artists like Ben Harper and Jack Johnson. He worked in the 2000s with artists like Belle and Sebastian, The Thrills, Fitz and the Tantrums, and today he's going to be sharing with us a mix from a soundtrack for a huge cult classic favorite of a movie, which is Donnie Darko. If you haven't checked out Donnie Darko, you probably should. It has a huge cult following for a good reason. It's a movie that is a critic's darling, and it's got a really cool, really interesting, really haunting soundtrack that we'll get to go under the hood of today. Like all MixCon masterclasses, this one is free to the public, and it is free to the public thanks to our sponsors. And the sponsor on this one is a natural fit. It is Antelope Audio. They make software and hardware solutions that Todd uses in his work mixing every single day. And their new Galaxy 32 Synergy Core now supports speaker calibration, not just for stereo playback, but also for surround sound and all the way up to Dolby Atmos 9.1.6. So if you're looking for an interface system that's going to do all of your heavy lifting and speaker calibration for you, both stereo and surround sound, Antelope is a great way to go. Their interfaces feature super high-end conversion and clocking. They support all sorts of communication protocols for virtually any setup: Thunderbolt, Dante, HDX, MADI, ADAT, you name it. And they can give you some serious extra juice for mixing with a whole suite of powerful effects powered by their proprietary Synergy Core platform. Check out the new Galaxy 32 Synergy Core and everything else they make over at antelopeaudio.com. If you want something totally for free, we've also got a MixCon mega giveaway going on. Check out the show notes in the description down below. You'll find a link. We're giving away thousands and thousands of dollars worth of free gear from all of MixCon sponsors. So check that out down below, and good luck to you. If you're here for the live premiere of this presentation, you can actually type your questions in real time into a live chat box, and we'll save the best questions that come in during this presentation for a live Q&A that's going to happen right after it concludes. Look for the link for that also down below in the description and in the comments. And if you're visiting us from the future, yes, the replay is available, and there'll be a link there, and it'll still work even if this is years from now. But if you're with us live, we want to hear your questions, so enter them in. Now, without further ado, really excited to get right into this one. Mr. Todd Burke is going to take us under the hood of a real mix from the soundtrack to the movie Donnie Darko, which he has recently remixed from stereo into Atmos. Let's get right into it. Todd, take it away.
Hey you guys, my name's Todd Burke. I am a recording engineer and mixer in Los Angeles, and I'm thrilled to be coming at you via Sonic Scoop today. I've been between speakers for a long time. And if I'm totally honest, to survive as long as I have, it's required sort of an ability to bounce back and forth between a few types of gig. I primarily record and mix albums, but in leaner moments over the years, I've been lucky enough to sort of pivot to underscore work, and back and forth, back to records, back to underscores, whatever. And I can safely say that if I'd have ever put all my eggs in either basket, and let's say I just sort of started passing on work from one type of client and held out for calls for the other camp, I probably would have gone under. I've found there's sort of an awful lot to be said to being open to sort of drifting where the work currents take me and finding, the fulfillment in the work itself, regardless of genre. But recently, I've found that having a background so deeply steeped in both record making and score mixing has made the transition to Atmos mixing, just really pretty intuitive and sort of simple, I'm sort of combining these two fairly different crafts, I guess, into a real love and maybe even a penchant for Atmos mixing. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So Atmos is very much in everyone's mind lately, with Tidal and Amazon and Apple Music now fully committed to streaming Atmos releases. As a mixer, you have to really make a real effort at this point to not get involved to some degree. If you haven't had a project come your way with Atmos as a delivery requirement, it's only a matter of time. You're gonna see this. So at NAMM 2022, which just passed, they had a Tesla in the building showing off its Atmos audio option. And it sounded great. And I think it's safe to say at this point, the failures that we've seen in consumer surround sound, and I'm talking about quad in the 70s and I suppose 5.1 mixing to SACD or DVDA in the 90s, Dolby seems to have conjured up this particular version of surround sound in such a way that I honestly believe that it's going to stick. Or maybe at this point in 2022, we just call it stuck, right? But, the bottom line is the way the format scales from headphones to maybe a living room soundbar to a 714 setup in the studio or in this hypothetical car that's in any of our futures, and even beyond to like theaters and large installations, like it's just badass. And then the fact that a mix created today in Atmos will have the ability to scale itself to future formats and technologies that we can't even imagine yet. And I'm thinking about like Elon's Neuralink or whatever, right? Like there's a lot of possibility there, and it's all mind-boggling is the truth. And I'm very excited about it. And I imagine you are too if you're here. So here we are. But there are engineers who've been mixing music to Atmos for a number of years now. And I'm, the guys at Capitol have been at it longer than anyone. And that's, Steve Genowick and Nick Reeves, and Greg Penny. But most of us began catching wind of this more recently, right? For me, I decided in the summer of 2021, which is about a year ago from shooting here, to start trying to figure this out, to start doing the math on whether or not I'd be able to use my existing space or not. And, sort of thinking about sort of cost versus potential return. And I eventually decided to go ahead and pull the trigger. But for me, it wasn't a terribly large leap because I'd already been mixing underscores in 7.1 in this place for a number of years. So I needed to hang height speakers, and I needed to figure out a speaker controller that would facilitate a few extra channels. I'd been using a 7.1 Martin Sound controller for years that was totally fine. It wasn't God's gift to fidelity necessarily, but for my purposes, it got the job done. And it was right at this time that I also got connected with the guys at Antelope Audio. And the timing was just sort of perfect. They seemed to be interested in a conversation, at least, about Atmos, and I was too. And sort of, to make a long story short, through a series of like brainstorming sessions over Zoom, really, we cobbled together the fundamental idea of taking their highest end audio interface, there's actually two of them, and building into them a software solution for Atmos speaker control. And, it was a totally self-centered pursuit for me, right? I wasn't looking to drop $5 or $10 grand on a speaker controller on top of the cost of more speakers and cabling and whatever. But it was obvious that there was no way to overlook the importance of a full featured speaker controller for Atmos, right? Like everyone needs that. Dolby's laid out a very specific spec for where the speakers go and how they should be voiced or EQ'd. And with so many speakers sort of honking at you, the arrival time of the signal from each speaker needs to be adjusted in order to get a system to image properly. And then, just like in 7.1 or 5.1, you need a controller to handle bass management. So for my setup here, that's all handled by a single 1U audio interface from Antelope. And it's likely the cost of getting going in Atmos will continue to come down as more mixers get set up with this, and more manufacturers see, a larger sort of audience to sell to, and the whole thing will sort of perpetuate itself. We're getting there. One thing that is absolutely true for all of us, we're putting together some unbelievably complex setups though. Engineer pals that are also working in Atmos, we all agree the learning curve is steeper than anything in the last 20 years, and these setups end up being very complex. There's no need to go on and on about the gear, I suppose, right? I could talk about Dante for 20 minutes, but let's not. Let's talk about mixing in Atmos. And I guess let's start with a quick history of sort of surround mixing, which I can only tell from my point of view from this chair over the last, decade or so. And what this evolution has looked like to me over the years has been a process of sort of inching our way forward through a series of small improvements. So I dabbled a bit in 5.1 in the early 2000s. I mixed a Ben Harper live album in 02 or 03 or something. There were some other things back then, but it wasn't until like 2012 or so that I really got going in surround, which is, and this era is one of those eras I mentioned earlier where I was really immersed in film work. And I'll tell you, transitioning from records to film, it wasn't a small leap, I mean, the gear's the same, and I absolutely love making records. Spending weeks, sometimes months with a band and helping them to fully realize, a dozen songs or so. Been some of the most rewarding days I've spent on this earth. But moving into film, I found it like liberating almost to suddenly be focused entirely on making music that served a scene within a movie, right? Like making music that has to fit within the emotion and the aesthetic of a scene. It's really tricky. But from a technical side, I found it to be sort of freeing, like to remove that constant worry of is this cool enough? Or is the snare the right decade? Or are the guitars sort of gritty and tough enough without being too metal? Like there's this endless list of totally subjective aesthetic calls we make all day long on records. And on film, all that energy often gets distilled down to simply, does this feel right? Does this music enhance the emotional drive of a scene? Are we steering the viewer towards the right feeling? So to me, working on underscores it's a lot less like cerebral and a lot more heartfelt. And I really like that part of it, is all I'm really trying to say. Generally, from the mixer seat, film scores have a lot less to do with being hi-fi and sort of well-mixed or aesthetically dialed, and a lot more to do with conjuring up a feeling and giving the heart the right nudge, So anyway, early 20-teens, I'd recorded and mixed a few movies at this point with a composer named Mike Andrews, but we'd only ever worked in stereo. And we kept having this experience of going into the final layback, the final audio mix of the film where the dialogue and the effects and the music are all blended together, and it sort of becomes the version of the film we all see in the theater, okay? But we'd show up to the layback and, we'd sort of scratch our heads because these stereo stems that we'd methodically crafted and blended and found that, really, really made them function emotionally. They're all sort of smeared around the room now in the theater. And in some cases, the cues sort of fell apart or, they weren't connecting in the same way. It seemed like most of the re-recording mixers were using a combination of plugins that'd sort of create center and rear content through some kind of, some odd filtering. And then there'd be some ambience added to fill out the theater. And while, most of us have been handing in stereo stems for decades, a lot of us still do. For my client and I, in that moment, we realized that we really should be mixing the cues we're making in surround and sort of handling that ourselves, simply to avoid this kind of awkward handoff in the final hours of the project. So from then on, I started mixing underscore cues in surround. So in those days, most everyone wanted 5.1. So I set up my room for 5.1. Left, center, right, 2 in the rear, and a sub, right? Easy. And the move to 5.1 absolutely improved the handoff to the dub stage. But, as a mixer, I really felt pretty limited. There was really only so much that you could do in terms of panning rear that didn't draw attention away from the scene. And that's, of course, the last thing that you want. So my experience in 5.1 really was a pretty humble process of filling out the rear speakers with a bit of the sort of natural ambience of the cue, whether that was reverb or, ambience mics, room mics. But for the most part, leaving the music to exist in front, left, and right, and then sort of fill out the rest of the room with a little bit of sauce. I might creep a little something into the center during montage moments or whatever, but really, panning any instrument over about 20% rear meant the instrument was now behind you. You were always sort of aware of this thing happening here. Well, I wanted my attention to be here. And it was just, there wasn't a whole lot of content that would work in the rear. You could make your send to the rear dark. You could put some delay on it. You could whatever the game was. But, in terms of a theatrical setting in 5.1, it was all about sort of hiding just enough content in the rear to fill out the room, but not draw attention. So by and large, I'd sneak 50 or 60% of the reverb returns from a cue's elements, let's say, to the rear. And that was the majority of what 5.1 was in my experience back then. So then we fast forward a few years to, let's say, 2015 or so. And more often than not, I'm getting the thumbs up to go ahead and deliver my stems in either 5.1 or 7.1. And, I'm always up for more. So I added side channels, moving my room from 5.1 to 7.1. And I remember on the day setting up the speaker stands and hoisting the speakers up there. And in that moment, I don't think I had any idea the creative difference that was about to happen. But the moment I got a session up and started fiddling, my mind was blown. Like in 7.1, suddenly I'm able to play with sort of panning elements of the score outside of left and right, and it gets wider and unbelievably exciting. And it's not drawing any energy to the rear of the room, right? It's not taking me away from the scene, but it's huge. Suddenly, like the sound stage, it's massive, and you can wrap the music sort of around the front corner of the theater, and it's just incredible, right? I just keep saying it, like the amount of sort of sonic real estate is unbelievably huge. This is just absolutely revolutionary in my mind, right? I just can't get enough of mixing underscores in 7.1. And I'm still having the most success pushing a cue's natural ambience, reverb and room mics and whatnot, to the rear for the most part. But I've just got this great big huge corner and the whole front of the theater now that I can pan around in 7.1, and it's remarkable. So then we fast forward to now, and maybe before we get into an approach to Atmos, I'm going to pull up a cue here that I recorded and mixed by my composer pal Mike Andrews on a film we did way back in the beginning of his film career called Donnie Darko. And we'd initially delivered stereo stems on this, but over the years we've sort of kept it up to date with the surround trends for DVD releases and whatnot. So let's have a look at this in its various incarnations over the years, from stereo to 5.1 to 7.1 and then to Atmos. So if we start here in 5.1, this was essentially the mix that went on a DVD release, I believe. If we look at this real quick, the cue is unbelievably simple. And I tend to keep things pretty easy, but this is like really, in general, but it's a really good example of things don't have to be hard to sound good. So what I've got here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stereo stems, and then some ambience to sort of fill out the room a bit. So let's just listen down to this cue and I'll sort of blab over it. This is such a beautiful cue. This was music in the first sort of frank moment in the movie where Donnie has sort of his sort of lucid dream and sees the bunny. He's walking across the golf course and it's a really major moment in the film. It's incredible. It's such a beautiful melody, super haunting, really lovely. As the melody comes in a second time here, we've got the Wurlitzer double. Mike had a rolling vocoder, still got it. And this vocoder is just such a lovely texture. And there's the Moog. You can still see the scene. It's a beautiful piece of music. And then we've got some mellotron flute there. And those are our elements. See here, in 5.1, pretty much doing the same thing that, I'm doing what we had sort of talked about just a second ago, where individual stems, the music for the most part is all just forward, just front, left, and right. I've creeped the Moog and the piano in. I guess I haven't. I thought I'd creep them in slightly so they would. Yeah, so the Moog is creeped in just a little bit, which sends a bit of it to the center channel, just to sort of, bridge the gap, I guess, between the two. And I've done the same thing here on the flute. What else is going on here? So essentially, as we talked, the best thing I've ever really come up with 5.1. This is a beautiful piece of that sort of moment in the film where Frank is just sort of standing there, kind of menacingly. It's beautiful. Or no, sorry. That swells over when the reveal of the jet engine in Donnie's bed. Amazing, right? So, anyway, I'm a fan of the film. But as I said in 5.1, for the most part, we've got everything forward, front, left, and right, filling out the center slightly, some sends to the LFE. And then, on the reverb returns, each element has got its own reverb. It could all be a plate. I actually think in an early mix of this, the original mix, we mixed it at Capitol initially, so that it was all just Capitol chambers. But, the best use of sort of 5.1 that I found on film was this idea of sort of panning a lot of your ambiences, or in this case, all of the ambience, sort of back-a-ways and filling out the theater a bit with the reverb from the cue, but sort of music forward. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Let's look at the 7.1. Let me see if I can just simply pop over. Okay, so here we are again. This was then a 7.1 pass we did, and this is sort of where you get into that kind of turning this front corner in the cue, where same thing. Moog is forward. Maybe we even sort of cheat it in slightly so we hit a bit of the center channel. Piano's forward, but then some of these things that enter a bit later, like the vocoder and the flute. But we can sort of pull them back into the theater a little bit, so they're maybe, instead of being, seemingly coming from the screen, they're coming back and sort of around us a bit. But we're able to do that because we've got these center channels, which sort of, create sort of a barrier that keeps the music still forward of center and not coming from behind us in a sort of like distracting way. And it just works out, beautifully. I'm doing a very similar thing with the reverb returns and pushing them more towards the sort of back quadrant, I guess, of the theater. But let's look at it. And again, if you're in headphones, I'm doing a binaural render of this. The audio of the cue that's coming through is going through the Dolby render in 5.1 and now in 7.1, but it will do a binaural. I'm gonna use the binaural output in the QuickTime video of this. So if you're in headphones, you will get somewhat of a sense of the space. So maybe put on some headphones. Here we go again. But music forward, some ambience, filming us out. Which, could work sort of back into the theater a bit as well. I don't mind it up here. Kind of like things to sort of incrementally work their way back, is the truth. But that feels so nice. That vocoder enters and it's a little bit more enveloping, in the 7.1. Same with that flute. It's just sort of wrapped. It's just so much wider and spacious throughout the front of the building here. I can't say enough about 7.1. There's such a leap forward. you get the gist, right? Like, there's no reason to talk this into the dirt. But the 7.1 really does give you, I just keep saying it, it just gives you this front corner, which is so beautiful and so powerful, and so many ways to sort of utilize that and maintain the sort of focus of the listener, the audience, forward at the screens. Very important. So then, then that brings us to the Atmos pass. So for this, I think I'll bring the render out here so we can see it. Yeah, that'll work. So then, in Atmos though, we've got to sort of, when I did the soundtrack record, we were no longer concerned with keeping the audience's faces pointed this way. This is a soundtrack record. This was purely audio enjoyment, right? And as we said, there's no reason to sort of be gentle with Atmos. It's Atmos. So we went really far with this, and I think it really came out cool. It's super effective. So this one, you can see I've got everything sort of assigned to an object, and we can get into, if anybody wants to talk about beds and objects and sort of getting into sort of like game plans in terms of all of that, we could talk that into the dirt. But let's just look at sort of panning considerations and things now. So this one in Atmos, we decided to really go for it. And you can see everything's sort of an object here. It starts out sort of how you would expect. Piano front, left, and right? That's objects 19 and 20 here, with the capital chamber here at 53 and 54. So it's not far off from what I would do on a 7.1 mix. And I decided to hold up a little bit on this one and sort of push, that vocoder is so ethereal that I thought that'd be a really good use of height for this one, is to push not only the flute but the vocoder sort of up into the space, and that reverb's up a bit. It really functions great. Another thing here, the Wurlitzer, which plays the melody the second time here, that's now up in the ceiling behind, which works out great. Yeah, and it's just so effective, So this is the vocoders coming from behind. It feels really nice. The flutes are kind of panned here, a lot like they were in the 7.1, honestly, but they're up quite a lot. They've got quite a lot of height to them, as you can see here. I ended up sort of duplicating. I've got a pair of plates that I'm using on the flute, so that I can have two different plates with sort of different responses to create kind of a quad reverb up top. And I'm doing the same thing with the Wurlitzer. The Wurlitzer. It's sort of pushed up to the top rear, and then it's got a couple of chambers, creating a quad reverb that's panned all the way up, actually. I just love it, though. I really love Atmos, and I love getting really aggressive, even with music that's this simple. It's really effective, like sort of having elements approaching face, all in sort of coming from different locations. I just love it. And I think I did a thing. I think I panned the Moog. Yeah, and the Moog sort of goes to the back, or actually the Moog is side to side here for this last little swell. So, there you have it. This is such a simple cue. It's such a, it's very easily digestible. It's very lovely. But it really works well in surround, and particularly in the soundtrack record in Atmos. I'm really proud of how that works, and I'm really proud of sort of not only how simple it is, but how effective sort of having everything coming from its own space can be. And that's sort of the biggest thing I think that we get into with Atmos as we start sort of breaking apart the stereo mix. This is pretty simple in that you don't have sort of like a rhythm section. You don't have like a real rhythmic component, which then as you break things apart from, the mix begins to unravel. This is such a sort of easy and simple piece of music. You can break it apart very easily and it just works, Other Atmos mixes are far more complicated to sort of pull them apart and maintain that sort of the feeling and the kind of propulsion, let's say, of the stereo mix when you start pulling things apart. But that's the game of it. That's the sort of beauty of it. That's the sort of puzzle that we're forever unraveling with Atmos. So let me put this session away and we'll wrap this up. Okay, so I've had some, really sort of creatively fulfilling afternoons lately, especially working on catalog music projects in Atmos. And I guess by that I mean records that are several years old, whose stereo mixes are already well known. Or the job really isn't mixing per se, like the song has been mixed, right? The job of the Atmos mixer is to sort of usher the song and its mix into a new format. To kind of like break it apart and then trim it around to find the spot that feels like where the stereo mix landed, like just like everything we were just talking about. And I've had some really fun times lately doing that. It's just a blast, And you're just sort of taking a mix and helping it to happen all around the room, And I guess I sort of approach a catalog mix as, maybe I've already said it, as like a puzzle to be solved, Like how can you spread this thing around and maintain that initial sense of balance, and particularly maintain the sort of like rhythm section propulsion of the thing. That's tricky, right? And it's super rewarding when you do find it. So I can't say enough about it. I absolutely love Atmos, and if you're thinking to get involved, you should, right? So, and I guess that's sort of what this video is about, I suppose. I mean, I guess I hope it serves a few purposes, and it's just that if you are maybe sort of just considering getting started in Atmos, this is maybe like a gentle nudge to just go for it, right? Just get in there. There's a ton of Atmos releases on whatever app you stream your music from, just waiting to be sort of like studied and learned from. And, the further you get into it, the more you'll realize, like I'm realizing, all the early engineers, the Steve Jenowicks and the Greg Pennies that I've already mentioned, they've sort of laid this groundwork for us in this format. And the thing that I love is those guys aren't fucking around. We're also lucky that the majority of this initial push of Atmos music releases, it's mixed like the fucking building was on fire. I love it. I think there's a sort of sense in the audio community that this has to matter, or it's really not worth doing. Everything that I hear and everyone that I know that's doing this is they're just going ultra bold with panning and sort of an approach to immersive that's just full on, like all out, and I absolutely love it. I'm here for it. In my opinion, Quad failed because I think, truthfully, with the exception of maybe Dark Side of the Moon and a couple of Tamita records, from what I've heard, that shit was sort of phoned in at best. It was like, it sounds like an afterthought. It sounds like a delivery requirement that was sort of just, I don't know what else to say, phoned in. So going forward in Atmos, let's be sure that every mix matters and that every mix is a move forward for not only the song, but for the format, right? And, on the other hand, if you're mixing in Atmos now, maybe this video is just a little reminder of how quickly the whole format has evolved over these last 10 or 20 years. But particularly this quantum leap we just took creatively from 5.1 to now Atmos, just in this last few years. And it really shouldn't be overlooked. It's sort of easy to take it for granted maybe, but it's been a series of a few small steps to get here. But we're here. Immersive mixing in 2022 has fully arrived. It's happening. I can't say it enough. Get involved.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that masterclass with Todd Burke as much as I did. Some great insights there from Todd on translating stereo mixes to surround formats from 5.1 and 7.1 all the way up to Dolby Atmos. If you're here for the live premiere, we've got a live Q&A coming up right afterwards. And if you're watching this in the future, check out the replay of the live Q&A we're about to do with Todd Burke right now. Check out the links down below. If you're looking to get into surround mixing or Atmos mixing for yourself, one great way to get into it is with Antelope Audio's interfaces. They offer full solutions that will handle all of your monitor routing and speaker calibration for any surround format all the way up to Dolby Atmos. Big thanks to them for sponsoring this presentation. Check out everything they make over at antelopeaudio.com. Or if you want something totally for free, we are giving away more than $10,000 worth of free gear right now in the MixCon Mega Giveaway. Look for that link down below in the comments and the description. And I hope to see you for the Q&A with Todd Burke coming right up after this. Thanks for hanging out with me. This has been Justin Coletti of Sonic Scoop. See you next time.